round. I don't think I've ever seen that. Things, they've got the resolutions the wrong way round. I don't think I've ever seen that happen before. And on that note, there are some things that I don't like. Nothing that ruins the phone, but just a couple of really strange decisions. Like if you look around this phone, it's got some really nice flourishes, like an IR blaster, a dual SIM tray, and the waveform-like speaker grill. But it just doesn't feel great. Dual SIM tray and the waveform-like speaker grill. But it just doesn't feel great. I'm usually a big fan of vegan leather. Like the Oppo Find X2 Pro has this really plush quality to it. But they've made the back of this phone just a little scratchy and plasticky. It feels a lot like Samsung's Galaxy Note 4 from 2014, and that finish was not particularly liked. I think the cameras could be a lot neater looking, especially given that there's only 3 lenses here, and I really think that if a phone is going to have text printed on it, it's got to be something special, not literally the word Xiaomi 3 times. But they do have a glass version of this phone, which I think does have a cleaner overall aesthetic. But then we've got the front of this phone, which I think does have a cleaner overall aesthetic. Have text printed on it, it's got to be something special, not literally the word Xiaomi 3 times. But they do have a glass version of this phone, which I think does have a cleaner overall aesthetic. But then we've got the front of the phone. And I've already said I think the screen itself is awesome, but it's just that I don't really like what's happening around it. Like, I think the concept of this screen, the fact that it's curved from all 4 sides, is a good concept. I think it has the potential to be great. The idea being that smartphones are increasingly gesture-based, and that gestures should be smoother if the phone's glass is curved. But the way that they've done it here means that 1, screen protectors do not play nicely. And if you can't find one that goes right up until the very edges, it will end up creating a ridge that your thumb just keeps hitting. And 2, it will end up creating a ridge. And if you can't find one that goes right up until the very edges, it will end up creating a ridge that your thumb just keeps hitting. And 2, it exaggerates the phone's asymmetry. You realize that the bottom bezel looks like it's a different thickness to the top bezel, which in itself looks like it's a different thickness to the side bezels. And what really makes this pop in not a good way is the corners. The corners are the only points where this display doesn't slope off, and so they kind of look like they're jutting out. It's almost like the screen's not been stretched quite right across the canvas of the phone, but you can somewhat address this by using wallpapers that mask the edges. These are all pretty minor gripes in the scheme of things, but there is one slightly more fundamental issue with this phone. But I do just need to quickly talk about the camera, because this is not just the most organized camera experience I've ever had, it's probably the most fun, too. It's got filters that are much more than just slight single color adjustments. You've got cinematic effects like phantom and nostalgia, which change the theme of your shots. And kind of hidden away for such a big feature, a whole set of movie modes. They use AI to create everything from a dolly zoom effect, to the ability to freeze frame just parts of a video, to simulating everything from a dolly zoom effect, to the ability to freeze a set of movie modes. They use AI to create everything from a dolly zoom effect, to the ability to freeze frame just parts of a video, to simulating having a slow shutter speed. And this third little lens here is actually a macro camera. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's a macro camera that's actually quite good. I think I've only ever said that about one other phone in the past before. It's only 5 megapixels, it's nothing crazy, but because it zooms in at the same time as having an incredibly short focusing distance, at times it genuinely feels like using a microscope. And there's so much more. There's dual video, there's long exposure, there's supermoon modes. The point is, this is a lot of fun. Now, if you wanted a more technical response than that, then I would say this is an A-grade set of cameras. It's not quite A+, where I would rank the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra and the iPhone 12 Pro Max, but it's ahead of A-, like the OnePlus 8T. You see, the main 108 megapixel sensor that we have here is, on one hand, it's aging. It's technically the same camera that we saw on the Mi Note 10 from 2019, but on the other hand, it's still, in almost every scenario, keeping up. It's got stellar detail, almost top-tier dynamic range, and some of the most delicious background blur you can get on a phone. In a lot of shots, you can dynamic range, and some of the most delicious background blur you can get on a phone. In a lot of shots, you can very clearly see more detail here than on the Samsung. Which kind of makes sense, because while Samsung converts its 108 megapixels down to 12, Xiaomi converts to 27. But I would say that its low light performance is nowhere near as consistent, and it's pretty easy to blur. But this is actually also the first phone which has night, and it's pretty easy to blur. But this is actually also the first phone that is consistent, and it's pretty easy to blur. But this is actually also the first phone which has night mode video. It's very interesting. Like, this is a sample of normal video from the Xiaomi and the Samsung, and if we turn the feature on, it kind of seems to sacrifice detail for extra brightness and a bit less noise. It's not groundbreaking, but it's more than a gimmick. There is also an ultra-wide camera here, and there's little more to say about it apart from the fact that it's fine. But two things are lacking. Zoom, this thing kind of sucks at it, and video consistency. It seems to shift color and exposure way more drastically than it should be doing as your subject makes slight movements. Oh yeah, and the battery capacity is 4,600 milliamp hours. It's plenty. I've been running it in what I would call a worst case scenario, and I'm still getting 6 hours of screen on time. So that's at Quad HD resolution, 120Hz refresh rate, and every AI mode turned on, which it does warn will increase battery drain further. And
Thank you. Tenkiza. Tenkiza. Наоборот, Tenkiza там не играет, это не игрушка.
And then for charging, because there isn't a charger in the box, I've just been using a OnePlus 8T brick, and it's filling it up in just under an hour. Right, so at this point, the Xiaomi Mi 11 almost looks like so much phone for the money that it's embarrassing for the others. But there is one big asterisk that we've just got to put next to that. Pricing. Because yes, this phone is the equivalent of $600. That's not some sort of marketing trick or early bird sale. That is the base price of the phone. In China. And that's not always an issue. There's a lot of products that release globally where the price all around the world is fairly constant. But in the case of Xiaomi phones, I feel like I've seen enough of these launches now to suspect that when this does release in other regions, they're going to make it significantly more expensive. For what I'm assuming are three main reasons. One, Xiaomi phones are generally made in China, and so naturally it's going to be more expensive to export them. Two, a lot of other countries, they whack a load of extra tax on top of that. UK. And three, in China, Xiaomi makes a lot of money from its services, like Xiaomi Cloud. And so I think because of that, they're perfectly happy making a bit less on products themselves. Whereas this isn't the case in the West, where we're very used to Google services. And so because of this, with last year's Mi 10, even though that released at the exact same price that this Mi 11 is releasing at, in the UK, it dropped at £799, which if you convert it back to dollars, is over 1,000. That's 1.8 times as much money just for the convenience of being local. And so what I would say about this Mi 11 is, if it comes to the global launch and it ends up being the equivalent of $1,000, then wait, I think you might well find something better releasing fairly shortly after. If it comes out at $800, then I would say it's absolutely worth it. And if by some miracle you're able to get it for $600, then shake that person's hand right off. The one thing to just keep in the back of your mind though is that this is the Mi 11. And if history is anything to go by, there will be a Mi 11 Pro, and quite possibly a Mi 11 Ultra. And so, as crazy powerful as this phone is, if what you're after is the very best of the best, that's probably coming soon. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, do consider subscribing, that would be amazing. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Какие вещи говорить надо?
Мы платим налог за машину бумажки, когда заправляемся и когда требует налоговая. Справедливая Россия за правду предлагает отменить транспортный налог.
So, you might remember last year, I made a video. Okay, this is probably top 5 coolest unboxings I've ever done. So, you probably heard of Xiaomi. They've made a one-of-a-kind smartphone that I'm pretty sure nobody outside the company has actually seen yet. I feel kind of honored. They sent it here, and I've done everything I can to have not looked at it yet. And just before we get to that, because, you know, Xiaomi's kind of crazy, there's more. We'll start fairly normal. This is their brand new Mi Note 10 Lite. The smartphone on top. So you might remember a phone called the Mi Note 10. I tested it last year. I'm pretty sure it was the first phone with a 108 megapixel camera, and it was $600. Well, this is basically that phone, but with a less capable camera, but it's $380. You've still got a flagship Gorilla Glass body, you've still got a flagship AMOLED display. $400 is the kind of price where you start to expect some sort of obvious compromise, but so far so good. And it also has a massive battery, 5,260 milliamp hours. Alright, let's give this 64 megapixel camera a shot. Okay, very, very early impressions are that actually it's pretty good. Nail press. Xiaomi. I've got to try it. I barely have any nails as it is. Go with this one here. That's good, it works. Okay, we should move on. Alright, I've been eyeing this one for a while now. I think I know what it is, and I don't think you'll have seen this coming. Oh, that's a little bigger than I expected. Bear with. Oh. Just cleaned my room today. This is a smart jacket, because nothing's good unless it's smart. So you're looking at a jacket that regulates its own temperature. So if I press a button down here, it starts heating up. It's got 2 different heat pads, in a similar way to if you've ever used the heated seats on a car, that kind of thing. This is definitely one of those ones where it's like, why has no one done this before? And if they have, why have I not heard of it? Here in the UK at least, I mean, I know in some places it gets colder, but here I know that it gets to temperatures where people would kill for the extra warmth. You know, the kind of temperature where it doesn't seem to matter how many layers you have on, it's still freezing. The one downside to bear in mind is that, you know, it doesn't power itself. You need to have a power bank permanently slotted inside of it. But I can say it works. I need to get this off. Oh dear. Whew. Now, moving from something that's smarter than it looks to something that probably looks smarter than it is. We've got this. It's Xiaomi's writing tablet, and I'll be honest, it looks a bit like an iPad, but for the price you can get it for, it's definitely not like an iPad. Let's find out. Oh, okay, well, it's very thin, it's very light, it's made of plastic. So the way this one works is you get a pen, it feels like a normal pen. You write on it the same way you would, I guess, on an iPad, and then you tap that home button once, and it disappears. And you know what, I'm actually kind of surprised how well it disappears. Whatever I've written previously is invisible, that's it. Okay, let's give it a go with a quick drawing. As someone who likes the idea of taking notes with a physical pen, and just someone who generally likes art, I'm a fan of this one, and I've not used a product quite like it before. What I actually thought was really cool though, if I've understood this right, is that Xiaomi's now making musical instruments, and knowing them, this won't be some sort of normal music instrument. There'll be some sort of smart element to it. Whoa! Take a look at that. Oh, gosh, okay. I like this matte finish, by the way. Matte finish is generally quite a good way to win me over. So you might know I used to be really into the drum kit when I was younger, but as far as general musical ability, it's pretty limited. We'll give it a shot. That's talent. I actually carried on using this after filming, just till I could form an opinion on it, and the best way to describe it is as a great learning tool if you're actually wanting to learn the instrument. The app has a fairly limited selection of songs, but credit where due, with each one it does walk you through, showing you exactly what you need to do, with actual LEDs on the instrument as visual indicators. It's still not enough to rescue my miserable musical talent. Then there's the company's Mi 10 Pro, which is their highest end flagship for 2020. And this is one of the few phones that actually trades blows in terms of specs with the Galaxy S20 Ultra. But I've already covered this phone in a separate video, so we're not going to delve into it. But one interesting thing about the unboxing experience is that, if I can get it out, the phone comes with a 65-watt charger, but the phone itself only charges with 50 watts. So I asked Xiaomi about this, and they said that this is basically so that you only need to carry around one brick for your phone and your laptop. Okay, this one's one of those boxes that I can tell exactly what's inside from the front. Do you remember that DJI Osmo Pocket that got released last year? That tiny camera with a built-in gimbal that could take 4K video for around $350? Yeah, well, this one looks like pretty much the same product, but for $200. We're talking alarmingly similar.
Новый Chevrolet Tahoe всегда поддержит вас в жизни без компромиссов. Выбирайте амбициозный маршрут. Решайте, как проведете время в дороге. Воплощайте самые масштабные замыслы. И двигайтесь вперед наперекор препятствиям. Новый Chevrolet Tahoe. В его силах, в вашей власти.
Эй,
Почему нам кажется, что мы тратим? Мы копим. Копим эмоции, впечатления, радость от новых встреч. Хорошо, что жизнь не карта памяти и позволяет копить столько, сколько хочется. Накопительный счет до 7,5% годовых в Газпромбанке.
народный. Сейчас заценим.
That tiny camera with a built-in gimbal that could take 4K video for around $350. Yeah, well, this one looks like pretty much the same product, but for $200. We're talking alarmingly similar. There we go. It's pretty boxy looking. It's predominantly plastic materials, but the construction feels tight. Now this is a gimbal camera, so the only real reason it exists, as opposed to you just recording with your phone, is that this should have a level of stabilization that's one step above the optical image stabilization built into it. It should have a level of stabilization that's one step above the optical image stabilization built into your phone. And it works. I took this one out for a spin too. The stabilization is great. That much becomes apparent from the moment you turn it on. But I would say this only makes sense if you're being particularly active. Side by side with the Galaxy S20 Ultra's front camera, for example, it is wider and more stable, but the phone does do a better job with dynamic range. Also, I found that tiny, more stable, but with the Galaxy S20 Ultra's front camera, for example, it is wider and more stable, but the phone does do a better job with dynamic range. Also, I found the tiny touchscreen a tad finicky, but you get used to that. Let's go for one I have zero. Found the tiny touchscreen a tad finicky, but you get used to that. Let's go for one I have zero idea about. Any guesses? It's a shaver. Whoa, it's actually like seriously compact. The blade is tiny. How small are these people's faces? I guess I'm gonna have to try it. Didn't think I'd be doing that today. Still surprised and slightly afraid. I did try it. I've never actually used an electric shaver before this one, but it got the result I wanted. It was pretty comfortable and it's cheap. Alright, next up is the Redmi 8A. This is a phone I've actually been meaning to cover for quite a while now. I really like covering entry-level phones. It's just that I feel that more of you guys want to see flagships. Immediate reaction, without even having turned it on, it's a good first impression for $90. It's a plastic back, but it's got this kind of nice textured finish that gives it grip and reduces fingerprints. So $90, and for that, my main point of reference out of the phones I've used is the Nokia 2.2, but this immediately feels like it's kind of a